Hello there and welcome to this course on Python Fundamentals for Human Resources course. My name is Valentine and I'll be your course instructor. In this particular course, we're going to follow this structure. So we'll get started learning about the objectives or the learning outcomes of the learning experience. After that, we'll get to learn about what these Python Fundamentals for Human Resource or for HR entail and why do we perform them. After that, we'll get into a practice session that should take us an hour or so, depending on how fast you can be able to learn and understand concepts. Then later, we'll go into just talking about the next steps, also what comes after this workshop. So this workshop is meant to be quite practical, intensive, and by the end of it all, we hope that you will be able to acquire the skills that will enable you to create that change that you would want to make within your organization or your community generally. So let's get started. By the end of today, we expected to have achieved these learning outcomes. We should be able to understand the importance of learning Python fundamentals for HR professionals. We should be able to also understand, we should be able to identify and explain the basic syntax of Python programming. So this is how we write code in the Python programming language. So how to be able to, create something like variables, etc. We should also be able to apply knowledge of data types, which are just classifications that we give to different just data that we work with. So and apply knowledge of data types and variables in Python to HR related tasks, be able to create and use functions in Python in order to organize code that we have written, code that may do data analysis work or processing work. We should also be able to implement what are called control structures that allow us to make decisions within our code and also implement loops which help us to go through or iterate through a collection of items, which would be, say, data that we might have. And the idea here is just generally to automate HR processes. So by the end of this course or this workshop, the idea is that you should have achieved these learning outcomes, which will be important in later workshops or later courses specific, which would be tailored specifically for certain areas of HR in relation to Python. It could be using Python for data visualization of HR data. It could be in the creation of models or what we call machine learning models related to HR problems that you might be tackling, etc. So starting off, Python fundamentals for HR refers to the basic concepts or skills in relation to Python that allow us to write what are called programs or just generally Python code. And this code we can use to automate or streamline various HR processes. For those who are new, a programming language generally is just that software that you can use to create other software. And there are many different types of programming languages. There are programming languages specifically for performing data analysis, such as Python or R or Julia. There are other programming languages suitable for creating web applications, such as JavaScript or PHP or Ruby on Rails, Ruby generally. So our focus is majorly to learn how to work with Python, which is one of those programming languages specifically for data analysis. Also, it also can be used. Python, we can use it for creating web applications as well as desktop applications. Our focus generally would be to introduce to you the basic Python concepts that will allow you to branch off into different contexts in relation to HR, whether it's Python for web development or Python for data analysis work or Python for even creating software applications that allow HR professionals to manage maybe data in relation to employees. That is generally our approach. And The fundamentals that we'll cover in relation to Python will be variables, data types, printing and comments, arithmetic operators, f-strings, if statements, loops, lists, dictionary sets, functions and modules, etc. So these will be critical in whatever context that you're going to be working with Python, and will be what many of your solutions will be based off. So having an understanding of variables and data types should allow you to create maybe a solution that you can use to visualize data when it comes to maybe getting insights on maybe recruitment, etc. So yeah. In terms of the types of deliverables that we can be able to work on if we have knowledge of Python in relation to HR, is we can be able to create reports, HR reports, and this might mean being able to source for data in relation to human resources, such as maybe turnover rates or recruitment metrics, and maybe the employee demographics. And as a result of that, we can do some sort of analysis. We can apply data wrangling techniques as well as data analysis techniques using a tool like Python, and be able to create what would be maybe summary tables, what would be visualizations, individual visualizations, or even just interactive dashboards that answer specific research questions that you might have. We might also be able to use Python in HR to create what are called automation scripts. So this is just code that you can use, Python code. So in programming languages, we write code, which is just generally just computer instructions that perform specific tasks. And we can write maybe a block of code that automates a particular aspect of HR, of a HR process. Maybe how we are able to onboard maybe new hires. It could be that we would want to generate maybe offer letters in an automated way, or we might want to offboard employees in a certain way through the use of behind the scenes Python. Or we might even be able to create features that allow us to manage performance review cycles. Maybe you might have multiple documents that contain data pertaining to employees, and you would want maybe to merge that data and also to do some sort of basic arithmetic operation or just mathematical operation that calculates maybe time off, or it does particular something. It achieves a particular operation, mathematical operation that could be repetitive and sometimes time consuming. So you can write Python code to be able to automate that piece of information or that process that you would normally undertake if you have knowledge of Python. We can also create chatbots and virtual assistants, which would behind the scenes take into account of some sort of database or knowledge database that would help handle, say, employee inquiries related to maybe HR policies. If in your organization, employees have questions with regards to policies, then they could ask a virtual assistant or a chatbot, and also get clarification when it comes to benefits. Maybe they might also want to even request time off. That is an aspect that you could automate and use Python to create a chatbot that is able to do that for you as a HR professional, especially where you have large organizations. Instead of even going to a step of looking for software that allows you to be able to do that, which comes at an expense, having knowledge of Python allows you to basically create scripts, Python scripts that are able to do that, but at the same time also create chatbots. Which, chatbots would just be a collection of multiple scripts or multiple blocks of code that perform a particular task. So yeah, so that is one the many deliverables. Another deliverable that you can be able to achieve. There's engagement, service, and analytics. If you have multiple service and or for data collection, or even just forms that you have, and you would want to aggregate data from all those different sources or those surveys, then you can use a tool like Python to be able to collect that data, clean that data automatically, and even just present that data in a relevant way in the form maybe of a dashboard to stakeholders that require to perform some action on that. And you can achieve this process by simply analyzing data using Python libraries, which are just code that has been written by the experts and shared and shared. So you can use those libraries or that bunch of code that has been written by the experts and be able to perform specific tasks that you might have. So you might use maybe Pandas, which is a library for data manipulation, to perform data manipulation tasks and be able to visualize our data using another library like Matplotlib. So those are just a few deliverables. There are many that one could undertake. Those are just a few, just give you an idea of what kind of work that you'd end up doing. With regards to some of the roles that are, that leverage Python in regards to HR, here are a few. So there are HR analysts or even data analysts that are focused solely on analyzing data and answering research problems based on the insights that they have gotten from that data. They might end up working on some of the deliverables that we've talked about, like HR reports, or even just being able to aggregate data from employment service and perform also analytics. So there are also HR information systems specialists who might use existing information systems that collect employee information and integrate those systems with other custom features within your organization. Maybe they might want to combine data from maybe an information system, an HR information system, with maybe some service that they have collected. Then they can use, they can write Python code that pulls data from different sources and aggregates it. They can also use, again, Python to automate data transfer from maybe one information system into another information system. These types of analysts, by the way, specialists are, you can find them in bigger organizations that have many employees, and they collect data about the employees. So hence their relevance. Recruiter and talent acquisition specialists. So in some cases, one might also want to maybe, as a recruiter, go through resumes in an easy and an efficient way, especially where you have high traffic of applications. Say if you have thousands of applications to go through, then you could use Python to automate that process of passing through, which just means going through and checking for some sort of checking off a criteria that you have set. Maybe you have some checklist items that you'd want to ensure that you check within the submitted resumes, and that way you can be able to narrow down to those candidates, potential candidates that are likely to fit in the opportunities that you have. In some other cases, you might also maybe want to also scrape job boards for other reasons, but those are just some of the specialists that might also find Python useful. There's learning and development professionals that might also want to look into using Python for creative modules on top of existing platforms. So if, for example, a learning development platform or platform that employees use to go through training programs, it has been built using Python, and the learning development professionals would want to integrate a interactive learning model that hasn't yet been implemented, it could be a quiz, it could be a simulation, then they might be able to do the same thing. They might be able to create some Python code that actually allows them to be able to do that. And some of the things that we've talked about, even just performing data analysis, some of the learning development professionals might even want to pull data from the existing learning management systems and analyze that data. And to be able to do that, they could use a tool like Python. But again, this also depends with organizations. Some organizations have dedicated staff, some like data analysts who can perform this work. Some have limited resources, or some have they don't have professionals who are versed in data. Hence, the current L&D, that's learning and development professionals, would undertake that task. Other roles that might end up using Python might be HR process automation specialists, or even HR consultants or advisors. So lastly, just to recap of what we've talked about, why would we learn Python fundamentals if we are in HR? The first reason would be to automate repetitive tasks that we've talked about, such as data entry, report generation, and also some administrative processes. The second bit would be to analyze large data sets. If you're using it by default Excel, and you would want to automate and also be able to analyze large data sets, then Python can be handy. You might also want to develop custom solutions, maybe for your organization's specific needs, maybe dashboards or other tools, maybe modules for your learning management systems that help achieve a certain HR goal or organization goal. Then that might be a reason. You might also maybe want to build employee self-service portals, especially in cases where you want to free up time and be able to work on other meaningful projects, and also be able to streamline the recruitment process and identify the best candidates more efficiently. So yeah, so those are the basic, what we have talked about so far is just generally the basic theoretical knowledge that you need to have when it comes to Python fundamentals for human resource, before now going into the practice work, which will entail going through the concepts that we had highlighted earlier, entailing variables and data types, etc., up until to functions and modules. So yeah, for this particular next step, what we're going to do is to now, I'm going to ask you to visit the link that we have shared, the resource link in the video description. Just click on that link, and that link should take you to a page that looks like this. So this is where you will be able to access the practice resource for today's workshop. So click on sample practice resource, that link over there, and that link should take you to now this other page that you see on your screen. So it should take you here, and this is just the document that we'll be using for to learn actually what we will be required to learn in relation to Python fundamentals. Just to give you a quick also intro into what we are covering, when it comes to working on Python fundamentals, or just working with Python generally, you can use Python for various contexts. But again, just to recap, what we are covering in this section and in this workshop or course only revolves around the fundamentals. We are not covering Python for data analysis work or data cleaning work or handling just any sort of data, like performing also data visualization or statistical analysis or machine learning. Before you get to those specific areas of Python in relation to by the way, I see it says manufacturing, but it ought to be human resources. Sorry for that. Yeah, so before we get to maybe those aspects of Python generally, in advanced aspects of Python, we need to grasp the fundamentals. So we need to ensure that we have gotten a feel of how do we work with the basic concepts of Python. Then once we have gotten these fundamentals, we would then go to the next step, which is now how do we explore data, and how do we perform data wrangling processes? How do we later onwards perform data analysis concepts like filtering, like creating summary tables, like creating pivot tables. Then after that, you get to learn about now how to create visualizations, like basic static visualizations. Then you move on to interactive visualizations. Then once that's done, you move on later onwards to statistical analysis. When you're good with statistical analysis, we move on again to the next step, which might involve now working on machine learning related topics like regression, classification, clustering, all those different aspects of machine learning. And that's also part of our series. This is just the first workshop of a series of workshops or courses that we're going to be undertaking in relation to working with Python in relation to human resource. So yeah, so once you have opened that link, so once you've clicked on that, it should take you to this particular document, and you should be good to go. Let me just close a few links that we do not necessarily need. So if you're an Afterwork member, you can log in into your account, then visit the link that I had shared earlier. Still the same link, but if you're an Afterwork member, you will be able to access the entire, not the sample notebook, but the entire notebook that contains all the challenges that you will need for the workshop. But if you just want to go through the workshop and just learn a few things, not so much deeper into HR and Python, then you can just use a sample notebook. It should be sufficient enough. But for persons interested in becoming in just learning more about human resources and how Python integrates into that, then you can consider becoming an Afterwork member and getting a hold of the practice notebook that we have, as well as the solution notebook that we have. Something else, if you feel like we are a bit too fast, you can always pause the video and also rewind the video, because we are streaming this, so which might be an advantage. If this was in a meeting room, then you wouldn't be able to pause. You wouldn't be able to pause and be able to do something about concepts that are a bit confusing. But you can always pause and rewind and get clarification. And if you have questions, you can ask in the comment section. So once you've gotten to the sample notebook, the next thing that you need to do is to save a copy of this notebook in Drive. So go to File, then Save a Copy in Drive, and this will allow you to be able to make changes to this particular document. So this document is just it's a notebook. It's a document that data analysts or data scientists use to share code, as well as information related to code, specifically for data analysis. But for our focus, we'll use this particular document to go through basic concepts in relation to R that we have already talked about. So once you've done that, you should see a new tab open, and just go File, Save a Copy in Drive. A new tab will open. You can close the original one, which is this one, and then use the new one that says Copy of Sample Notebook. I will just and that should be it. So once you've done that, the next thing that you should do is to click on Connect to connect your notebook to Google Service, which will just generally be where our Python code will be run. So click on that, and you should see at the very top connecting, and it should also say connected once it's done, and you should see a green check, and it says connected, and we are good to go. All right. This notebook, which is a document, it usually has what are called cells. There are code cells and text cells. So this is a text cell that contains multiple text cells, and inside those text cells, there are also what are called code cells. Left hand side over here, we have table of contents. If you click on one section, it will just reveal. It will just reveal those sections. But I can just use also the arrows over here to navigate. So let's go through the first concept, introduction to Python syntax. As you can remember what we had mentioned in our learning outcomes. So starting off, variables. The concept of variables in Python. So when we are working with a programming language like Python, we tend to work with data. And this data comes in different forms. There's data that comes in text form. There's data that comes in numerical form. There's data that comes in also other different forms, like a collection of data. So, but in Python, we tend to talk about these different types of data as data types. So data types are more like classifications that we give to the different pieces of information. So in Python, we have the string data type, which is just basically some text. So the string data type. There is integer data type, which is just a whole number. And there's also float data type, which is a decimal point number. There's also what we call a Boolean data type, which would be generally that type of classification that would give to data that either has two values. It's true or false. So in our first instance, John Doe is string. It's a string data type. This is an integer data type. This number is also an integer data type. This has an integer data type. This also has this has a float data type. This has a Boolean data type. So these are what you see here on our right is just information that has information that we have. But we would want to store these pieces of information somewhere in programming. That's where we store this piece of information somewhere so that we can later onwards refer to that piece of information and apply various operations. Maybe you want to multiply this number times this number, or this number times this number to determine something else. Then in such a situation, we would want to store those individual pieces of information in just what are called containers, but now in programming call them variables. We store them in variables, which are just containers. Each information will be stored in its own container, and then we reference that container whenever we want to perform an operation. So for the first case, we are assigning this value John Doe, and we use the equal sign to this employee name variable. So this container, which is called a variable, usually has a name. So we assign John Doe to the variable employee name. We assign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the variable employee ID. We assign value 30 to employee age. We assign value 50,000.00 to the variable employee salary, and we assign the true value to the variable is active. You'll note that we have underscores between the words for the variable names that we have. It's a convention that we normally use for readability. But again, there are conventions or rules that come that are important that we must follow when it comes to defining or writing variables. So when we are creating a variable, by the way, this container, we tend to say that we are defining the variable. So in our case, when we are defining variables, there are rules that we follow. Like, for example, we cannot start with a special character like a hash or something of that sort. Something else to note is that you see this green information. The green information that is highlighted in green, we treat that as a comment. So this is a comment and a comment. And a comment is just explanatory information that isn't Python code and doesn't get executed by Python itself. So and also to explain something else I had forgotten, when it comes to working with programming languages, we write code, but when we write code, behind the scenes, what executes that code, like what executes Python code is a special program. In the case of Python, it's called an interpreter. So there's a Python interpreter that runs the code that we have here. So this is Python code that I have highlighted, and this is also Python code. This is a comment, this is a comment. So the Python interpreter, that special program, does not execute what is highlighted in green, and because it's a comment. And how we specify this is a comment is we put a hash in front of the content that comes after. So this will be treated as a hash. And if I was to put maybe even a hash over here, not even a space, but just without even a space, this would also be treated as a comment, but I don't want that. So here we have created all these variables and assigned them values, and then later we can print them out. Print them out means just display the values of these variables, because once we store them, we don't know what exactly is inside those variables. So we can display them, and we can display that information using what is called a function, a print function. So a function is a way of organizing our code, and it could be any code. So we can create a function to organize a block of code that prints out information from a variable. So there's already some block of code in Python programming, language, in the Python language, that behind the scenes prints out information. And this code, we give it an input or multiple inputs, then it gives us an output. So what we want to do in our case, we want to print out the values that are stored in these variables. So we can print out employee name, employee ID, employee age, and employee salary, and employee is active. And something also to note, a function has a name, that's a print, and you have to ensure that it's small and exact. And to define the input of what we are giving to the function, we usually use parentheses. So inside the parentheses, we define the input. So the first input is employee name. So we want to print out this particular piece of text or string, comma, then employee name. So we will print out employee name, and also we will print out this variable. The same case for employee ID, age, salary, and is active. So if I run this, I should see, by the way, if you get this pop-up, just know that you haven't saved a copy in Drive. I don't need to save mine. So yeah, because I don't want the changes. So if we click on this icon over here, which will run the code, it will print out employee name, employee ID, employee age, employee salary, and employee is active, because we have decided to print out two things. For the first one, this line corresponds to this line, this line corresponds to this line, this line, sorry, this second line, the third one corresponds to the third one. So for each and every instance of printing, we are printing the string that we had given and also the variable that we had given. All right, the next thing we are going to do is to challenge ourselves now. We have learned something here, a few concepts. We've learned about variables, data types, and how to print. I am going to ask you to work on this challenge. So create variables to store the following employee information. So name, age, department, and is manager. We have already named that just to start you off. So you need to also create other variables for age, department, and is manager. And then you need to print out each variable's value using the print function. So you can just copy the code here if you want, or you can just write the code from scratch if you want. There's a bit of some hints here that allow you to just understand what's happening. So ensure that you don't store maybe something like an age as a string. It tells you integers for age, boolean for is manager, etc. For those who are Afterwork members, you can verify this solution by going to the solution notebook and clicking on challenge, and you can be able to see that. I will not do that. So at this particular point, pause the video, and once you have let me see we sample, sorry. At this particular point, pause the video, work on the challenge. Once you're done, you can unpause the video and then you can continue. Moving on, I have talked about printing. We use a print function and we give the print function some input. Like in our case here, we are giving our print function this string and it's going to print out this particular string. The same case in this other line, we're giving it this particular string and it's going to print out this string. So printing just allows us to be able to display output, maybe saved in our variables, while comments allow us, like what we have here, to have just notes in our code. You can have multiple line comments, single line comments, but for now we're just going to learn about single line comments. Multiple line comments, you can just it's usually 3 characters, delimiter characters, so whatever comes in between here. Actually, it's not that kind of character, it's like quotes, single quotes, single delimiters. Yeah, so they usually triple quotes, and whatever that comes also in here will be treated as a comment. But this is a complex way of writing comments. But for now, just take note that when we are writing comments, we can just use a single hash character in front. So work on the challenge, pause the video, and then once you're done, we can continue. The next thing we are going to learn is about F strings. So sometimes we tend to work with yes, we tend to work with variables, but we want to print out variables. We might want to print out variables within strings. So for example, in our case, here employee name, we might want to have employee name appear in between here when we are printing. So, or employee age to be just somewhere here, and do something about it. So instead of just putting, let's say, a string, comma, then the variable name, comma, another string, we can use what are called F strings to just easily format our strings. So for example, if we have these variables that we have saved here, we have them here, we can decide to, output maybe, or print out a statement or a string that contains all the variables. So we can say, we want to print out employee name, then the name, then employee ID, then a department, and then department. So what we can do is to say, use what is called an F string. An F string is just a way of just being able to print out or to print out a string that contains variables. So we first of all define F, it could be capital or a small, then we put into quotes the string that we want. Then inside the string, we define where the variables will go through the use of curly brace. So employee name, then the curly brace, the opening one, and the closing curly brace. Then we say, we put in the variable name, and then we continue putting our string. This character that you see here, /n, it's usually a new line character. It's called a new line character. Just tells Python we want the following employee ID, the string that comes after from here, to come to the next line. So without new line, we would have just employee name and then John Doe, then employee ID on the same line. But /n, which is a new line character, just tells Python to have employee ID on the next line. The same case with department. And we also just embed now our variables where we want in the string. So if we run this, we should be able to see that we have employee name, then John Doe, then employee ID, department, etc. And take note that we stored this string, F string, inside this variable, and we printed it out. But we could also alternatively just copy this and put it inside the print function without using the variable itself. Something else also, what we have here inside the curly brace, yes, it's our variable, but in this context, we usually refer to it as an expression. So this is an expression, this is an expression, this is an expression, and you can perform like other operations. If this is employee ID, you could also do maybe +1, and you'll see that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. You can do like calculations inside there, but for our case, we just want for it to appear the way it is. We don't want to introduce complexities. All right. By the way, take note also that you can also just go through the explanations that we've provided about the concept, as well as the explanations about the code, to just understand the content better. All right. At this particular point, pause the video, work on the challenge, and once you're done, we can continue to the next step. Basic arithmetic operations. So at times we might want to add values, and assuming those values are stored in variables. So we have HR employees in this, this is the first variable, this is the other variable. So total employees might be HR employees, the first variable, plus recruitment employees. And we store the outcome of this particular operation inside total employees, and then we later onwards print it out. So sometimes you might want to perform those arithmetic operations or mathematical operations. And to be able to do that, we tend to use what are called arithmetic operators, like the addition, a symbol sign there is an arithmetic operator. There is subtraction, multiplication, and division. And there are even other complex ones that we won't cover so much actually in this particular workshop, such as there's a modulus operator that returns a remainder. There's exponentiation operator that raises something to the power of maybe, let's say, 300 maybe to the power of 2, usually put it as double star, then 2, that's 300 raised to power 2, etc. But yeah, so those are just operators that help us achieve just basic arithmetic operations. So let's see another example, total years and experience and total HR employees, and we can do that and be able to print out average years of experience. And you can see that's our output. This is the first output, this is the second output. All right, this particular point, pause the video and work on the challenge, and once you're done, we can continue. Moving on to data types, I've already talked about data types being just a way of classifying the data that we are working with. But just to further clarify a bit more, we tend to work with data types with respect to numbers, and we refer generally to them as numeric data types. And there are whole numbers, there are float point numbers, which are just decimals, and there are also what are called complex numbers. We won't be working with complex numbers at this particular point, but yeah. So for example, here we have an integer that we are storing inside this variable, a float we are storing inside this variable, and then float we are also storing inside this variable, and we can print them out as shown and also perform further operations. This is just a quick recap of what we've covered so far. So yeah, just recap that, then work on the challenge, and then we'll continue. All right, moving on. Sometimes we might want to store multiple pieces of information, not just one piece of information. Like, let's say we have, right now we have been using maybe one piece of information in one variable. But what if we wanted multiple pieces of information? Maybe store multiple employees within one container and perform some operations on, that particular collection of data. How would we do that? We use what are called they're still data types, but we usually treat them as what are called data structures. So these are just advanced containers that we can store data temporarily and perform operations on. So for example, lists is one of them. There's also tuples or tuples. A list allows us to store multiple pieces of information. So we have this variable name, but now we will call it just a list. We have this list that has this piece of information. So we have a collection of information like Alice, Bob, Charlie, and David, but we want to store that together in a list. So we use a square bracket. When it comes to using a list, we usually use a square bracket on the left-hand side. Then the piece of information, it could be a string. It could also be a mix of strings, integers, or floats. Then we separate the different elements that we want using just commas. So we store this list inside the employee names container. That's the list. And then we can print out. If we wanted to update maybe the second item, so assuming that we wanted to update Bob, then we can use this method. And this method involves getting to know that inside the list there are what are called positions or indexes. And the position for each and every element. So in a list, we have elements or what we call items. So this is an element, there's an element, you can also call them items, but each of them has a position. So Alice is position 0, Bob is position 1, Charlie is position 2, etc. So we usually start from position 0 in a list. Let's start. So starting off, say we can say, if we update the second element, we would say we want to update the element at position 1. So position 0, position 1. So that's Bob. So employee names, we refer to the list, then we put square brackets, refer to Bob, and we want to assign it this new value. So the element at this position, we assign it this new value, and we print out updated employee names. So we initially will see this list, which will print here. Then we will see the updated one, which will be by this particular statement. On the other hand, lists, for lists, we can be able to update them. We can delete elements, but assuming that we wanted to not be able to modify the elements that we are working with, we can then, instead of using a list, use a tuple. A tuple is another data structure, another way of storing multiple collection of elements or multiple pieces of information. But now those pieces of information won't be changed, updatable. If you could say that's a word, you won't be able to update those pieces of information. So we can decide to use a tuple, and we use a parenthesis instead of square bracket, and we can print. If you later try to, once you run this code, and then you try to initially, you'll see you'll have employee ages. You'll have actually 25. You have this output and this output. Let's even run and see what happens. You can see we have this for this particular statement, or this line, we have this. For print updated list, we have this with Eve as the one that has been updated. But here we have employee ages, which is what we are printing out here, and employee ages, which is what we are printing out here. But if you try to update, let's say, employee ages, the list, it's the second element, we'll get an error because tuples are not updatable. We tend to refer that as immutable. So if we try that, we will get an error. And I just uncommented that line, so I would need to comment it again. That was just to demonstrate that you cannot be able to update elements in a tuple. All right, work on the challenges, and then we can continue. Moving on, dictionaries. So lists allow us, and tuples allow us to just store information, which is just related. But assuming that we wanted to further maybe store more information about the elements that we have here. Maybe Alice wanted to store maybe their age, Bob also their age, or Alice their age, their street address, etc. So we might want to introduce maybe some other dimension to how we store our data, and that's where what are called dictionaries come in. There's also called you can also use asset as well, but dictionaries allow us to store information in what is called a key value pair. So where we have, let's say, this is a dictionary, employee information, this is a key, and this is a value. So the key is this, and this is a value. So we can be able to store information in key value pair. And this can also, you can also have dictionaries inside dictionaries, or even lists inside dictionaries. That doesn't really matter but it depends with the nature of the data that you're working with. So dictionaries give us a good idea of how we can be able to work with them. Let's print them out, and we can see how we can be able to work with them. So we can store information in there and also be able to retrieve pieces of information. So for example, if I wanted to retrieve John Doe, I can just decide to put a double bracket, then 0001, and I should be able to see John Doe if I wanted to print out John Doe. It's more like you're just referencing the keys to be able to retrieve, and also to replace that information. You just say 001. You could always just equate it to something else. Equal to you can equate it somewhere outside. I don't know, maybe somewhere here, and just call it Valentine. And here we can just set it as this. I think should give us Valentine. So that has replaced John Doe. All right, work on the challenge, and then once you're done, we can continue. There's type conversion. So type conversion just refers to converting one data type to another data type. Maybe because by the way it is originally, the information itself, it's not, you cannot be able to work with it. Maybe you've stored data in a string format that you'd want to use for mathematical operations. Maybe a number has been stored in a a string format, you need to convert that number, that piece of information into maybe an integer or float. So let's learn just how to be able to do that. So for example, we can have this variable age string that stores this string as 30, and we can be able to convert this information into an integer using the int function. So this is another function aside from print. This is now int function. It converts an integer, which will be the input that it converts the input into an integer. So the input here, which is ASTR, which is a string, it will be converted into an integer. And only this works for pieces of information that have just quotes on it. If you have maybe some complex information, maybe you have maybe a dash there, then you'll get an error. It has just to be the straightforward way. And if you want to further go into, let's say, how to convert such pieces of information or perform such data preprocessing techniques, which are a bit more complex, that will be in another workshop called text preprocessing techniques with Python. So yeah, so we can also do the same thing if we wanted to convert maybe integer into a string using the str function. We can also convert a float to an integer as shown. So let's run that. And yeah, you could always just preview them. I won't preview them, but you can preview them for to be able to see what happens. Yeah, so right now you're not seeing challenges, but if you go through the practice notebook, you'll be able to see the challenges that we have for type conversion. There's a challenge already for that. That's what I was saying. If you want to learn more, just go through the practice notebook instead. Yeah, so, or you can become an Afterwork member. All right, let's continue. Control structures. Sometimes we might have some information that we would want to perform maybe automation on, and this might involve doing some if-else statements, like if-else conditions, or even just looping through. And to be able to work with, let's say, check for whether certain values exist in variables or in data structures, we can use what are called if statements. So assuming we have this variable, wanted to check whether employee age is less than 30 or less than 18, then we can, and then perform an operation. We can use an if statement. We write the if keyword, then we write an expression that we want to check, a condition. So employee age, is it less than 18? We can also use greater than, or we can also use greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, or equal to with double, or not equal to, if we wanted. Those are just different expressions, different operators that help us to arrive at whatever desired condition that we have. So if employee age is 18, we put a double colon, then we will print out this employee is a minor, or we will execute the code that comes in the indent. So in our case, the body of this if statement is what will be within this indent. So whatever, it could be multiple lines of code. We could also have another line or an if expression. So if this age is, if employee age is less than 18, then we'll print out this. Else, to handle now the other condition else, we print out employees and adult. So employees and adult because this is 30 already. Work on the challenge. If you have the practice notebook for that, there's already a challenge for that, for if statements. Work on the challenge, and then we can continue. Nested if statements. So for nested if, so here we have just one if statement, but we can have another if statement inside to just handle some complex situations. So for example, if employee experience is greater than or equal to 5, then we check again if performance rating, which is here, is greater than or equal to 4, then we do some, we do some operation. But again, remember, this has to be indented. So the body of this if statement is here. So an if statement has a body that gets executed if the expression turns out to be true. The same case with the else part, this is what would be executed. So let's run that and work on the challenge, and then we can continue. Elif, instead of writing the way we've done, we might want to do we might want to check also if experience is it's greater than or equal to 5 or greater than or equal to 10. Like we might want to have multiple conditions checked within our entire logic process. So we might use elif statements, elif statements. So we might define, let's say, the first condition, and then we say elif again, employee age starts. But again, we might also want to check for multiple conditions. Employee age is greater than or equal to 18. And now we define a second condition, employee age is less than or 65, and then we print out that. And you can also do the same thing with also having multiple conditions here with also the the nested if as well as if else. Doesn't really matter. And this is what will be printed. There's also or just ensures if any of these expressions turns out to be true, then we print out what's in here. But and both of these ones have to turn out to be true for this to be printed. Let's run that, and then you can work on the challenge, and then we can continue. For loops. So assuming that we are working with a list or dictionaries, and we want to go through each and every element or item within the dictionary or for loop, then we can be able to use what is inside the list or dictionary. We can use what is called a for loop. So for example, in order to go through each and every element and maybe even perform some operation on each and every element, we can use what is called a for loop. So it allows us to iterate over a sequence of elements, whether it's a list, a tuple, a string, or whatever. We define, first of all, a for loop. A for loop also has a body, so you have to indent, otherwise you will get an error. So it's usually double tabs for clarity. Then we define the variable that will hold the current item. So here we're going to have 5 iterations. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for each iteration, we'll be holding the value of the current iteration. So the value within that current iteration. So for the first iteration, the employee variable will be Alice. The second iteration, the employee variable will be Bob, etc. And then we also define what exactly we want to loop through, which we use the in keyword, and we say employees and put a double colon and define the operations that we want to do. Here we just want to loop and print out the iterations, the values of employee for each iteration. All right, work on the challenge, and then we can continue. While loops are more like for loops, only that you need to have some conditions or some condition to be true in order for the loop to happen. So here we are going to define 2 variables. Then we define the expression that we want to be true for us to be able to iterate through. And then inside the while loop, we want to, on the body of the while loop, we want to print out processing employee, then processed employees, which is 0 plus 1, which is an expression, and then we perform processed employees. This expression it's more like, let me put a comment. It's more like if you rewrite this as is equals to processed employees plus 1. Yeah. So we do this up until this expression turns out to be false, and then we stop. If you wanted to maybe stop at some point within your loop, you can use what is called a continue statement or break statement. For the continue statement, it tells you that if at some point we get to the continue statement, just stop executing whatever that is in the rest of the body of the current iteration and continue to the next iteration. But if we want to get out of the entire loop, maybe we want to stop at Charlie when let's say employee is equal to, it's equal to David, we stop at this, then we can use just a break statement as shown there. I think I'll just go through one more, and then I'll let you continue working on the rest. I'll just go through just defining functions. Functions, we've already talked about functions. We are able to give them inputs, and they give us an output, and they perform a specific task. So sometimes you might want to write our own code, our own function to perform a specific task. So we might want to write a function that calculates annual salary. So we define a function, a custom function, by using the def keyword, then custom def, then calculate annual salary as the name. Then we give it inputs. Then in those inputs, which will be the form of like variables, we would apply just different operations on them, and then we return some output. So these will be the input, and the output will actually be annual salary. I won't go through the entire of the notebook. I will let you continue. Normally, as learners, technical learners, we tend to learn by just understanding what's happening. We've provided all the notes, and we hope you're going to learn successfully. All the best in your journey.